If you would, have your Bibles open to Luke 14, where we just were. If you haven't opened there yet, go ahead and do that. If you don't have a Bible, there should be one right in front of you in the pew back. Let's go ahead and just jump into this. Well, I have a lot to say. We got to jump into it. Then Jesus said to his hosts, when you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your sisters, your relatives or your rich neighbors. If you do, then they may invite you back, and then so you will be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they can't repay you, you will be paid at the resurrection of the righteous. One of the really big points in this entire verses 1 through 24, which if you remember from last week, I said there's actually 3 stories in 1 through 24. There's 3 pericopes. There's the man with the dropsy, and then there's what we did last week, which is a conversations about seats and humility. And then there's this week, the great banquet, but it's all happening in one evening. And one of the things you really, really need to understand really all of 1 through 24 is this word reciprocity. Reciprocity was a huge ordeal in the Greco-Roman world. Just socially speaking, it's how they interacted. It was their cultural expectation. If you've never heard this word, what it means is this. If I scratch your back, then I expect you to scratch mine. That's essentially what it means, okay? Quite literally, in the ancient world, you actually would host feasts in the hopes that you'll be invited maybe to an even better one. I'll scratch your back, obviously you scratch mine, maybe even a little bit harder. It was a way to kind of, socially speaking, get what you want. Now, maybe our Western world doesn't do this quite as much, although I know sometimes it can be inferred. It absolutely can be inferred in our Western world, but it still exists today. I'm confident the culture in Japan is a culture of reciprocity. Okay, so while this may not be necessarily in our Western minds, it does exist in our world today. And so our question maybe could be this: is reciprocity a bad thing? Is this a bad thing for us, for our Christian lives? How would you answer this? Is reciprocity a bad thing? Here's my answer. Are you ready? I say, no, of course not. Reciprocity is not a bad thing. You can do things here on earth, and you ought to expect to be repaid. Reciprocity is not a bad thing. What's bad is when we so often expect reciprocity from people rather than from God. That's the whole point of this, isn't it? Don't look to other people to be repaid for the good things that you're doing. But it doesn't say don't look at all. Just don't look for other people to do it. Look toward God to do these things and trust that God will do these things. I think in some ways Jesus is actually coaching you towards your own self-interests here. How? Because what he's saying is that if your earthly relationships are grounded in reciprocity, he says you will get repaid for those. You will. But it's not going to be enough. It's just that it's not enough. That's not good enough. All people down here can do is to give you something that you just gave them. I mean, if you own a business, it's a bad use of your time. It's a bad ROI to go give something to someone in business and then get the exact same thing back. Why are you doing that? That you're not getting anything. You already had it. Like, it's bad ROI. It's in the business world, right? That's it. Being repaid by someone now is simply not enough. Or maybe we could say it's just too meager. It's too meager. Jesus says you will get repaid. But here's the deal. Ready? It's only once do you get repaid. Only once do you get repaid. You can have Joe Schmo pay you back, or you can have the King of the universe pay you back. That's your choice. Joe Schmo or King of the universe. Which one do you think is going to offer the better payback, the better reward? You see, I think normally the problem with Christians is not that they're seeking too much, it's that we just so often settle for too less. I would encourage, if you're taking notes, write that phrase right next to your verse 14. I mean, that's really what verse 14 is all about. It's not that you're asking too much. You just settle for way too less. We settle for way too less. There may not be a better way of explaining how I know this is true than to tell you about what happens to my family every single time we walk into Animal Kingdom at Disney World. Now, maybe you've never been to Animal Kingdom. If not, let me explain. Animal Kingdom is one of Disney's four theme parks in Orlando, but it's the most unique one because it's also a fully functional zoo. Okay, so there's a bunch of rides, roller coasters and stuff, but it's a fully functional zoo. And these are the main gates to Animal Kingdom, but if you've been to Animal Kingdom, you know that when you walk in the door, you're not really like in the center of the park yet. You're not. You don't see the big tree. There's no restaurants. There's no rides. You wind through these paths, right? When you walk, and there's all this foliage. There's all these bushes, all these trees kind of clambering down on you. And as you wind through these paths, and there's strangely like a lot of them, I feel like. A lot of different paths you got to kind of wind through. And as you wind through, there's all these little animal exhibits along the way. But when I say little animal exhibits, I mean like, I'm not talking about tigers. I'm talking like there's ducks. There's like a little thing with some turtles. I don't even know why they're there. It just seems like a waste of space, waste of time. I don't know what they're doing. But here's the deal. Those ducks and those turtles are enough to slow down a family of 4 if you have toddlers in the stroller. I'll tell you that right now. I mean, every single time we would go to Animal Kingdom, and we had the annual passes, every single time, Eden and Isla, they see a turtle. They got to put the drink down. They got to unbuckle the thing. We got to put the shoes on, because they've surely taken them off. They got to put the shoes on. They got to climb out of the stroller. They got to go stand at the thing for 3 minutes and look at this turtle. Then when they're done, they got to get back in the stroller, buckle it back up, take your shoes off, get your drink ready, and we're going to go on, and there's another turtle thing in like 10 feet. Got to do it all again. This takes like 20 minutes for a toddler family to go through these silly little exhibits. And I'm just like, guys, Animal Kingdom is on the other side. What are we doing here? Like, as someone who values efficiency, maybe I shouldn't have had kids. I don't know, but I just feel like we are not being efficient with our day. But my kids keep getting stuck on the ducks. What's their problem? Did they ask for too much? No, they asked to go to Disney. It's just that toddlers so very often, as we know, settle for far too less than what their parents are willing to do. And the exact same is true for us. The exact same thing is true. Being repaid now for the good things that you're doing is settling. You're settling. Don't settle. God has better things in his hand for you. You need to be patient. Do things for people right now who cannot give you a favor. Do things for people right now who cannot owe you one. Because God says if that's how you're going to act, he's like, I've got something really, really special in my hand for you. Does this make sense to you guys? And so when Jesus tells them this idea about settling, there's a guy in the crowd. He's like, hey, blessed is the one who will eat the feasts in the kingdom of God. And so Jesus is like, all right, maybe he kind of gets it. Jesus is like, let me tell you a story. A certain man was preparing a great banquet, invited many guests. At the time of the banquet, he sent his servant to tell those who had been invited, "Come, for everything is now ready." Now I'm about to tell you something that you're really going to have to grasp in order for you to get like the big thing at the end, okay? So you're going to have to hang on to this. In the ancient world, when you held a great feast, you did not send out one invitation, you sent out two invitations. Okay? You sent out two invitations. One to collect the RSVPs, because you had to know how many people were coming. You had to know how many animals to butcher. You didn't have a fridge. You didn't have a cooler. You didn't have one of those like old refrigerators in your garage that everyone has. You didn't have that back then. And so you're killing life in order to have this feast, and you better know how much you got to kill. No fridges meant that if you butchered the wrong amount, you would completely waste it. Not having the right amount would have been extremely costly and extremely frustrating to the host, as you could imagine, right? We get frustrated when we overcook and we got fridges. Imagine how frustrating it would have been back then. So you sent out this first invitation, which essentially would have been an RSVP, but then once everything was butchered and cooked, then you sent out the next invitation. You say the feast is ready. And as a smoker, as someone who owns the Traeger, like, you know, if I'm smoking meat at the house and you come over for dinner, I'll give you a range, but don't expect dinner when I say to expect dinner. Because even with electronic, perfect science smoking, I have no idea when this is going to be done. I have no earthly idea. Only God knows, right? They didn't even have Traegers back then. They had no earthly idea when this would be done, right? No earthly idea. So there's two invitations. If you get it, say got it. You see the first invitation is the RSVP in verse 16. Look at your Bible. Verse 16, there's the first one. And then verse 17, there's the second one. Two invitations. We're going to need to remember that a little bit later. Something to note real quick before we move on. If you received the second invitation, it is only because you received the first one and RSVP'd and said yes. You don't receive the second invitation without saying yes to the first one. Get it? Okay. You were indeed coming. So this is what happens. And this guy, he's got this feast. He sent out not one but his two invitations. Everything's ready. But they all alike began to make excuses. Verse 18a is the crux of this whole thing. It's really what the rest of our sermon is about. Excuses. And we could do a long sermon series on excuses that church people give, couldn't we? Excuses that you give. Excuses that I give. But they all began to make excuses. The first one, here's the first one. He's like, hey, I just bought a field and I got to go see it. Please excuse me. Another one said, I just bought 5 yoke of oxen. I'm on my way to try them out. Please excuse me. Still another said, I just got married, so obviously I can't come. Let's talk about these 3 excuses real quick, okay? The first one requires the need to inspect a field that someone just bought. Culturally speaking, this is a fine excuse. It's a relevant excuse. Sometimes in the ancient world, you would actually have a post-inspection thing that you would have to go do, okay? So I get it. It's a fine excuse. He really does have something to do. But he did RSVP. You can see where his priorities are, right? You can see where the priorities are. The second one involves a guy who buys 5 oxen. In the commentaries I was reading this week, they said that if you were pretty wealthy, you probably owned 1 or 2. This dude just willy-nilly bought 5. I mean, willy-nilly. I mean, he is very, very wealthy, this guy, okay? So you can kind of see where his priorities are as well, right? He's got his investments in his stuff, and he's got to go look at his stuff. He wants to go try out the oxen as if he's in 3rd grade trying on a pair of Nikes to see how fast they go. I don't know why you got to try him out, but that's what he says. I got to go try him out. And then the third one involves a recent marriage. Now, there were Old Testament laws. You can look in Deuteronomy chapters 20 and 24. Old Testament laws that basically say if you are married, you're recently married, you are excused in some social things to be with your wife. But here's the deal. Once again, he RSVP'd. He knew he was coming. He knew he was getting married. And other commentators say you could have just brought your wife. It's not that much of an excuse. Your family is not that much of an excuse. Is essentially, excuse number 3 boils down to commentators saying your family's not that much of an excuse. Now please remember, all of these people, they already accepted the initial invitation. They accepted it. They were in. They were coming. And then they realized they had better things to do. And so how does the guy react? The servant came back and reported this to his master, and then the owner of the house became angry. He has no fridges, people. He's killed all these animals, maybe that he even loved, and nobody's coming. And he says, quickly go out into the streets and the alleys of the town and bring in the poor and the crippled and the blind and the lame. Now, just a quick little interesting thing to note. In verses 1 through 6, we didn't preach this one. We skipped it. But there's a guy with dropsy, right? And Jesus healed him, right? Why was the guy with dropsy there? Did the Pharisees say, I'd love for you to come? Of course not. So why was he there? So the Pharisee paid him to come to be a trap. See if what Jesus would do, right? So this dude who just got healed is probably having the best food he's ever had in his life. And Jesus is like, you can even bring him in. I mean, you have to feel awkward for this guy. He has been used as a prop and is still being used as a prop this entire time. But Jesus is like, go get everybody, the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. Sir, the servant said, what you have ordered has been done, but there's still room. Then the master told his servant, go out into the roads and the country lanes and compel, I love that word, compel them to come in so that my house will be full. I tell you, not one of those who were invited will get a taste of my banquet. So, for the rest of our sermon this morning, we're going to be talking in categories. Because when Jesus, when the host of this party, when he invites people, there's essentially kind of 3 categories, right? There's 3 categories of people that he invites. Category 1 is the people who've been there all along and deserve an invite. This is the obvious invitation. Category 2 is the people who've been there all along, but to be honest, they don't deserve an invite. This is that awkward invitation. And then category 3 is the people on the outside who, to be honest, they weren't even considered for an invitation initially. This is the shocking invitation. So let me explain who's who. In this story, category 1 are God-fearing, law-abiding Jews. Good Jews. Good little behaving Jews. Okay? They're the obvious invitation in this story. Category 2 are Jews who've been there all along, but for whatever reason, they just don't measure up. The blind, the lame, the crippled, the poor, the unclean Jews, the prostitutes, the beggars. Fair? This is the awkward invitation. And then in category 3, who's that? Well, very specifically, when Jesus tells the story, he's like, go out into the alleyways and the far out towns. He's talking about Gentiles, okay? People who are not Jews. People who never would have been thought to be invited, because Jews don't do what? They don't eat with Gentiles. But this guy is having a feast with Gentiles. It's crazy. And Jesus is telling the story. And what does Jesus say in verse 24? Verse 24 is the point of this whole thing. He says the people who were first invited will not get a taste of the messianic banquet. We've talked about that word the last few weeks. They're not going to get a taste of this messianic banquet that Isaiah 25 and 55 talks about. So here's the deal. Let's try to preach this in a way that is going to make sense to us. It's good. Maybe help you contextualize this a little bit for our church today. I'm going to see if maybe these three categories maybe speak to Maryland Heights in 2026. I'm not saying this is specifically what the Bible necessarily says or calls for really specifically, but let's just see if this kind of plays out, okay? I think if Jesus was to tell this story today, this is what the categories would sound like. Category one is the well-behaving Christians who've always gone to church. This is the obvious invitation. Category two is the publicly struggling Christians. That's the awkward invitation. And category three is the people outside our doors. This is the shocking invitation. When I'm talking about category three, I'm talking about like Muslims. People in this physical neighborhood. Our church is in a neighborhood. You know that, right? It's kind of strange. I've never been a part of a church that's just in a neighborhood. But our church is in a neighborhood. There could be struggling neighbors in our neighborhood. There's atheists, maybe even people who are against Christianity. I don't know. Category two, let's talk about them at our church. Category two would be people maybe who have a little bit 1 foot in, 1 foot out here. People who have publicly struggled. Everyone knows it. It's not a secret. People who are probably not super qualified for leadership positions here. Truthfully, people who maybe they're taking more than they're giving. But let's talk about category one for a little bit. I know I've only been here for a little bit, but I think this church is very full of category one Christians. In fact, I think I'm a category one Christian. And if I'm being honest, I'm trying to raise category one kids. There's nothing wrong with it. Category one should be a great goal. As a parent, your goal is that you raise kids that have super boring testimonies. That's the goal. There's nothing wrong with category one, at least initially. But please remember, Jesus' problem was with category one. And I'm not saying that there's something just internally wrong with people in category one. I don't know if there's something internally wrong necessarily with me. I think that's where I belong, but people in that category, all I'm saying is this, is that we have to take special heed to this parable. Do not blow it over. Because this parable is about you. It's just about you. In Jesus' story, category one people were the God-fearing, law-abiding Jews. The good guys, the expected guests for this feast are God-fearing, law-abiding Jews who are waiting and waiting and waiting for God's kingdom to arrive, only to find that when it does, they had more pressing things to do. So remember, I think if you've grown up in church all your life, and generally speaking, you're somewhat well behaved, I think you belong in the first category. You are the people who have received the first invitation and you accepted. Right? We accepted that first invitation. We've been baptized. We've said the prayers. We've read the Bible cover to cover. We've done the studies. We've shown up to the service projects. We've sang the songs. We've accepted that first invitation. But Maryland Heights, please remember, just like in this story, in our lives, there's actually two invitations. And that's probably just a huge hang-up that so many Christians get hung up on. Is we respond to that first invitation and think, I'm here. Time to coast. I'm done. God's happy with me. Call it quits. And then we go into a spiritual nursing home where we kind of live the rest of our lives being taken care of. Is this preaching to anybody? The first invitation is to say yes to Jesus, but then the second one is to actually show up when it's time to follow him. This might be the big point of the whole sermon. Might be the thing I'm trying to say all morning. If you're taking notes, I need you to write this next one down, because this is my big warning to Category 1 Christians who are just like me. Here it is. Ready? Be very, very careful to not pray with holy expectation for God's kingdom to grow and move at this church and your life, and then have excuses for your absence when it does. And that's it. The dangerous thing at knowing the things you ought to pray for is that you don't show up when God answers the prayers. It is. It just is. As a professional minister, I may not have a bigger pet peeve than this. Now, I've got a list of pet peeves. We could go over them sometime if you want. But this is one of my biggest pet peeves, maybe, in all of professional ministry. I cannot tell you how many, and I've been a youth minister, right? This is where I come from. I cannot tell you how many times teen parents, maybe even teenagers in my group, will come up to me and tell me all of the things that obviously our youth group ought to be doing. And generally speaking, it's always about service. You got to serve, you got to serve, you got to serve, you got to serve, you got to serve. Do the service project, you got to serve. They got to get out there more. They got to do more stuff. You got to serve, they got to serve, they got to serve. And so finally I plan the service project, or I plan the mission trip. And guess what magically happens every time? Clockwork. Everyone has a thing, an excuse, something going on. I can't come, I've got cheerleading. I've got basketball. I've got ACT prep. My great aunt's half birthday party's tonight. I'm fine to tell this story because I would say this to the church. I just came from a church where about 8 years ago they did this thing where they hired in this company, and this company came and kind of just did like a really big congregational study of who we were. They did all of these surveys. They surveyed the neighborhood that we were in. They did all of these studies about who we were. And of course, every member got to just give this company all of this feedback, and they compiled it into this awesome presentation for our eldership to just kind of know who we were, know where our hearts were, all this sort of stuff. Overwhelmingly, the number one thing that everybody said that our church is really missing and lacking is what? They say, we got to get out into the neighborhood. We got to go out to the neighborhood, go do all of that stuff. You know what our church did? We literally hired an outreach minister because of this, to help us, to train us, to do this. And can I tell you something? Last 4 or 5 years, it really did seem like the only person who's doing outreach at that church is the outreach minister. Why? Because the people in our church who said, we should be out in the community, what they actually meant was our minister needs to get out in the community. That's what they actually meant. Because they simply wouldn't show up. I tell people all the time, I said this in our class this morning to the teenagers, I tell these people all the time, if you ever want to know what your heart is truly like, there's 3 ways that you can look. Number 1, the thing that reveals your heart best, number 1 is your prayer receipts. Just listen to what you pray about. Check your prayer receipts. Why? Because what you pray about is what you care about, and what you care about is what you pray about. This is why and again, we talked about prayer for 50 minutes in my little teen class this morning. And we agreed. There is no prayer, generally speaking, there's no prayer that's wrong before the Lord. God loves your heart. He loves everything that's on it, everything that's in it. You can bring everything to Him. But if, generally speaking, if you printed off your prayer transcripts and all you saw was, bless this food and keep us safe on our drive, if that was the overwhelming majority, then guess what? It's strange, but like what you really care about is bless this food, your health, and your safety. So you can check your prayer list for the things that really, really, really concern your heart. Second thing, check your algorithm. Man, Facebook knows you better than you know you. I promise you it does. Because it listens. And it knows. And it sees the things you click on, even when you try to hide it from everybody else. It's weird how much you cannot hide from Facebook and from Instagram and from whatever the thing is that you're doing. Megan will say all the time, how does it know? Because it knows. So if you want to know what's in your heart, check your algorithm. Okay? What's funny is my Facebook algorithm has one, and my Instagram algorithm is the one that my girls will try to get on. My Instagram algorithm is constantly full of puppies. Your algorithm knows what your heart wants. And number 3, the things that best reveal your heart is your calendar. And that's where we get back to our sermon. I know you're busy. I know you're busy. I know you're busy because I know I'm busy. Well, I get it, but guess what? I got to tell you something. Being busy is not a badge of honor. And we say, it's weird. In our culture, being busy is a greeting. Hey, Tim, how you doing? Busy. All right. It's a greeting. That's how normalized busy is. Being busy should not be a badge of honor. It should be a concern. Why? Because busy Christians often don't have time for the interruptions that God is placing in your lives. I have something, I think this is true. If it's not, you can email me. I think this is true. I don't think I've ever witnessed where Jesus planned a service project. I don't see that in the scripture. Did he plan it? Did Jesus plan to help the lady with the issue of blood? Oh, he was interrupted. The vast majority of Jesus' ministry has nothing to do with him planning something. It has everything to do with him reacting to what God is putting in front of him. I'm really going off script here. A sign of maturity in your toddler is that they stop throwing that plate when you put it in front of them. When they eat what is set before them. I'm wondering if there are Christians in the room that, spiritually speaking, God is trying to put something in front of you and you keep going like that because you don't like the taste of that. Not eating what's set before you. God put that neighbor in your life. God put that frustrating coworker in your life. God put that kid in your life. God put that strained relationship. Whatever it is. I don't know what it is, right? We need to be Christians who eat what is set before us. That's a sign of maturity. And here's the deal. As someone, I've already told you this, as someone who really appreciates efficiency, I hate interruptions. I hate interruptions. But my best stories that would make everyone go, oh, wow, they are all interruptions. I don't even know why I plan stuff anymore, because that's not the good stuff. The good stuff is the interruptions. I guess when I've been talking to Megan about this a lot. I've coined the phrase for this. God does his best ministry in our lives when we allow him to give us holy interruptions. Holy interruptions. Now here's the thing. I know I've given you a lot to think about. I know this one was a little bit more challenging, but I'm not going to apologize because here's the deal. That's what the great banquet is. If you want a fun, fuzzy one, go to the next chapter, Luke 15. Okay? I mean, that's a great one. Parable of the Prodigal Son, so good. I actually hope that we're going to do a really long sermon series on just that one because I love it so much. But I hope you take Jesus' warnings to heart. I hope you realize that following Jesus actually requires not just responding to one invitation, but actually 2 invitations this morning. And I know that we see ourselves in this story as party guests, and that's true, but maybe one of the final takeaways might be this: all party guests are expected to become party hosts. If you only stay a party guest, then you only stay a taker. And that's kind of what this whole thing that we're trying to do this summer is, isn't it? Meals with the Master. That's the opportunity we've got this summer. You've been invited and have accepted the invitation to follow Jesus and join God at the great messianic banquet. But here's the catch: all party guests must eventually turn into a party host. We learn from Jesus about how he joyfully grew the kingdom. And we get to do the same. We get to do it. Not we have to do it. Don't you love eating with people? It's fun. It's fun to do this. And so I hope this week you really consider sharing a table with someone who maybe you haven't before. Someone new, someone different, maybe someone not from the same category as you. And as you do, may we be reminded to never allow trivial things to get in our way when God's kingdom begins to move. Wes is about to stand up and lead us in a song. If any of you want to respond to this, I want to encourage you to respond in your own heart. Ask God, God, show me what I need to see. I promise you he will. That's Matthew 6. I promise you he will. Show me what you want from me. What do I need to do? What is the thing that you have set before me that I keep swiping away? Let's do that as we stand and sing.